Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who helped shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for the show, but if we pretended to, today's episode would be brought to you by gratitude. Michael Roy, aka Birdcap, brings up gratitude a number of times in this interview and the last interview. I think it sounds right for gratitude to be the sponsor of today's show. Now, today's interview is part 2 of 2 interviews that I recorded with the great Michael Roy, aka Birdcap. This interview was recorded on January 15th, 2025. Enjoy the interview. Today is Wednesday, January 15th, hanging out here with Birdcap, aka Michael Roy, which reminds me, so one of the things that I totally forgot to ask, which is a total brainer thing to ask, where did Birdcap come from?
Oh, man.
And I know that's like the dumb first question people ask you, but I don't know it, so it's news to me.
It's the worst question because I don't have a good answer. I feel like I've lied numerous times about it to try to clean it up and make it sound better. The truth might make more sense in this context because it actually came from a Painting 3 assignment under TAD, where I did this series of paintings of a man trying to explain art or just trying to communicate with a bird. And by the end, the bird, and the man starts kind of painted realistically, and the bird's extremely abstract. By the end, the bird hasn't changed, but the man has changed and has become more abstract. So he doesn't communicate well, and in doing so, he kind of loses himself trying to communicate. And it was this whole thing about how direct communication is silly in visual arts. It's not the format for it. There's a reason contracts are written in text and not images, and it was very much like a rip-off of explaining art to a dead hare in retrospect. But I at the end, the sort of simplified head I had given the human that mimicked the bird, I had called a Birdcap. And for a while, I used this moniker when I was out drinking. If I was signing a napkin box or something, it looked like an Elmer glue top, and I would call them Birdcaps. And that, it just kind of sat there in the doldrums of my head. And then when I went out and did graffiti in Korea, I suddenly needed a name, and I liked how Birdcap came to mind. It seemed like it had no meaning outside of myself, and it kind of matched Junk House, who was the lady teaching me. So it had a synergy with her name. It could translate to Korean and back without kind of corrupting on Google Translate. So I went with Birdcap.
And to me, it's interesting too, in terms of thinking about it's like a moniker. Mm-hmm. Is that the word? Where it's you're kind of hidden behind it, and there's a kind of freedom that goes along with it, maybe in the early stages before people really know who you are. And so it's kind of like a anonymous, or almost like kind of a Zorro kind of a thing. Is that, and then P.S., I'm keenly aware of how very outside the graffiti street art world I sound right now. But is that a part of it as well?
I think it's a big part of it. I think it comes from your identity feels sort of valueless. What's another Michael on a list? Mm. So it was in one way, it was a way to give myself meaning that I could subscribe to, because it felt harder to subscribe to value in myself in the arts. but also like it was a part of street art and graffiti. You obviously wouldn't write Michael on a wall. I was doing a lot of like work that was illegal, and so you needed a pseudonym. And it kind of, my entire generation hit at this moment, street art wise, where like it has always made sense to have a pseudonym for doing illegal work. You'd be silly to put your initials on a wall.
Right.
But it hit at this juxtaposition where it was important for artists to accept the reality that we are, at least partially brands. And so it became a brand. Michael Roy is not a brand. Very few people can make a brand with just their name. I mean, the ones that do are like incredibly famous. It makes something far more essential to culture than cartoons. So, yeah, it was clever marketing. By no means my idea, but it was a clever marketing thing that many people in the genre seemed to be doing. It made sense to me. And it was also like essential because I was going to continue doing illegal work because I wasn't getting hired. And walls are not like sheets of Stonehenge. You can't just go do them in private, safely in your house. So that's it, I guess.
Okay, that's good.
Everyone else had one, so I had one.
And so, as we left last time, you said, okay, I feel bad I didn't spend as much time talking about MCA as I probably could have. Are there some things that, like, in the downtime since we met, maybe the couple of weeks that you were like, oh, yeah, I totally should have talked about that?
Oh, I gave it no thought. I feel bad. I remember saying that. I didn't say MCA, I said Tad. I think I rightly spent a lot of time on Fred Burton. And there was this, Protestant guilty part of me that feels like I hadn't named the other saint of my, like, art Catholic church, which was Tad, right? But he was incredibly influential on me, and he helped me on a much more like personal level. He gave me like specific books to read as I was going through like the crisis of trying to figure out if art was meaningful to me anymore. And he activated a much more like fun dialogue in art, whereas Fred was a religious artist in a way. And so yeah, I guess wanted to like give a serious nod to how influential his classes were and him as like a human was in my development. And he's a large reason like I kept making art after I graduated, because I think senior year I was really like grossed out by my work and how much we talked about things that did not seem impactful to the world, and I was really being pulled. I was like, I'm not good at it. I don't know if it's important at all. I feel like people who don't do art believe in art so much more than I do at this moment, and Tad kind of stopped me from quitting in a lot of ways.
I like that. I mean, for me, that's one of the things that is important for me about this project. I want for there to be a space where people can talk about people that were important to them, people that were not just important teachers, but also people who kind of nudged you when it was time to be nudged. I appreciate you doing that. What were just out of curiosity, what were the books that Tad suggested? Because you mentioned those in particular.
I can't even remember at this moment. There was one. There were two he gave me. One was like sort of a music book about sample culture or something. But it wasn't really like what the book said as much as like, I don't know, a teacher brought his personal books from home to try to help me because he like listened to my nonsense complaints. Or like, and he yelled at me once in class. It was like some concept piece, but I was just like, I was playing a game of like trying to solve the assignment without solving it. Like I had gotten so into the idea of like playing with words in an art assignment that like I had sort of lost the plot, where it was like it was just sort of this like cynical nihilism to like art, where I was just like, well, what if I now he snapped and he was like, stop fucking with me, and I was like, oh, this is real. This is like I'm a human in the world around other humans. I have to consider how I look to the world. And then he sent me like a sweet apology email like that night, which was unnecessary. But I just liked how real the relationship felt, because I know you're not owed that as a student. I think you can like fulfill your like contract as a teacher and be considered a good teacher and keep it extremely impersonal and extremely separated and distant. And I think Tad put in a lot of, psychological and emotional energy to be a real person with each student, or at least with me. I feel like he did it to a lot of students. But I think that was super important, to feel seen at that age, when you don't feel like your art's any good, you don't feel like you have any experience or clout, and then this like person who like has a full career and he makes work that you like, which is big, because I had a lot of teachers and I was like, well, I don't want to paint like that. But like, he made cool work. So that was big, that he was like sort of pouring himself. He was willing to be pissed at me. I can't imagine a number of teachers ever caring enough about me to be pissed by something dumb I say. So I appreciated that a whole lot.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that's interesting about these conversations is that I feel like I'm able to know some of the people that I know really well, but I do not know Tad as a teacher. I only know Tad as a collaborator and as a friend and as an artist. I've never seen him at work in the classroom, and so being able to hear people like you tell stories like that, to me, are really helpful and great in the way that I can't know my friend Tad. And also, I love that thing that you said about how serious he was. Like when you look at Tad's work, for me, when I look at it, initially I'm struck by the fun and the pleasure and the playfulness. But Tad is a very thoughtful, and I know that's one of those things where, like, as I just said it, I realized that I said it like it was kind of a surprise. But he is a very thoughtful, very deep, very serious person about his work, and he really cares about it a lot.
He is. I mean, you look at the finish of it, it's all like obsessive, anal retentive, like extremely clean edges and done well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's extremely professional presenting. And the work might have like an embryonic state of fun or like carefreeness. Like I think that's where he gets his concepts and the compositions. But then the way they're like put together is highly restrained in spite of that. And so it's that contrast that I think makes his work appealing. Like that last show, there are these fun wires and extension cord pieces, but then they're like CNC routed or like hand cut and polished and sanded and just extremely well taken care of. That show could be terrible if he didn't have that extremely serious aesthetic that like makes you take the randomness and the chaos of those images and go like, oh, it's exactly where he wants it to be. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But you felt that in his teaching style too. He's one of the most easygoing. He likes to laugh in class, and he's excited by preposterous ideas. But under that is someone who, like, this is his favorite thing. He takes it very seriously. And for someone who's, like, so, like, part of the team and laughing with you, you can piss him off because he does care, like, an extreme amount. And that's to say, I mean, he probably yelled once in 10 years, and it was probably just at me that one time. This was not a normal thing for him in any sort of way. But that it was there, I think, is very telling. He wasn't watching the clock and just like, ready to check out.
Right, he wasn't ready to roll.
Yeah.
Okay, so last time when we were talking, we were sort of going in this semi-chronological state. And I think the place where we left off was when you finished with your time in Korea and you did some traveling.
Okay.
And so one of the things I'm super curious about in terms of thinking about your, like, there were a lot of things that you said in that last interview where I was listening to it like a young person who would be interested in this kind of life, you know. And when you said, I then got in a van and went to Vietnam and went to so and so and went to so and so. And so I'm curious, how did you know when you were there in Korea and when you finished with your contract and everything? I mean, I really love also how the last time I got the sense that you were up for, like, I don't really have any big responsibilities. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have a bunch of kids. I don't have to do anything like that. And I love that adventurousness and that you didn't have anything to lose. I wrote that down and underlined it a bunch of times. But when you finished with Korea, where did you go?
Initially, I went to Vietnam.
Okay.
And I was there for maybe like a month.
Okay.
Painted a lot of graffiti with this guy who goes by Liar Bin, Lai Bei, and it was great. It was crazy. I painted with some of the worst paint I've ever used in my life. It was truly like gelatin. I did this live painting for this event. He got me a job doing, and I bought red paint, white paint, and black paint. I was doing a lot of like monochromatic creatures back then. And I was like, this would be perfect. And I get there, and you're scooping it out like tofu, and they're just not intermingling in the cup. You basically need a pestle and mortar type situation. And it was exciting to work on the go with such unusable material. But it was fun. It was exciting. It was my first trip into like, go to a place you don't know anybody, they do the same thing you do, and then it was very positive. Like, I had a great time with these people. We ate together, we drank together,
But did you know them from some of your friends in Korea?
We had mutual friends.
Okay.
But that was it. I messaged them not through the mutual friend, but saw them on Facebook or Instagram, and I was like, hey, I go by Birdcap, and I'm American, and I'll be in Ho Chi Minh for a month. And they're like, cool, we'll paint walls. And then that was it. But it was such like a green light sort of culture where it's like I'd reach out, everything would be exciting. I didn't have any expectations, so I guess almost everything felt successful. Like, it's not like I thought I was making money. It's not like I thought anything big would happen. I wasn't trying to get a 6-story wall, so painting in an alley with random folks I've never met before felt like a huge victory. And I just wanted to be part of the culture at that point. So any moment when I was painting and I was with people who have painted longer than me, I was like, oh, I'm part of the culture. It feels like when you watch those like stand-up documentaries and they're like, I didn't care if I was funny. I was a comedian now. I hung out with the comedians afterwards. Like, I didn't care if my art was that good or if I ever made money off of it. It was enough that like I'd paint on a wall all day, and then I'd eat dinner, get beer with people who painted on walls all day. That's all I wanted, was to like be part of that. And yeah, they were great. After that, I went to Cambodia, which was difficult. It's weird being, relatively safe in a place with that much poverty. Angkor Wat was cool. But then I went to Thailand, and I was there for probably like a month as well, and I painted with a lot of much bigger name muralists. Looking back, like, it was crazy. I painted with Alex Face, who's like internationally successful and stuff, and I was like so wet behind the ears and didn't know how to paint well at all. But it was a really good time. And then when I was in Thailand, my dad got sick, and I came back to the States to be with him for his heart surgery, and then started in the States after that.
One of the things I'm struck by when you're talking about doing the work in Cambodia or in Vietnam or Korea is this thing where there you are as a young person, as someone who's sort of wet behind the ears, like you said, and working with somebody else who's really big. And that's not a thing that we typically have in, or at least that I can think of, in terms of the art community. I mean, there's a kind of collegiality in my brain, and then we see each other at openings, and then maybe we'll make room to see each other and to do studio visits and things like that. But for you to go out and to have these particular experiences, to me, seems really interesting, and then also something totally enviable. Like, there's a part of me that's like, oh my god, we dumb canvas painters should do a lot more of that, because that sounds really important. I'm curious. And then also, one of the things too that I think that probably does for you is to realize the humanness of these figures that are, like you said, larger than life. I wonder, what are some other things that you feel like you got from some of those just totally normal interactions?
There were a lot of things. I don't mean this negatively to like the gallery world, but the gallery world and like studio painters are more, in my experience, curated. That like they have a concept and a theme and an aesthetic that is very specific, and they do not want to mess up that formula. And not formula in like a weak way, but like it's like they're making a special cocktail. You don't want to mix it up. I found what's rewarding about sort of the shallowness of street art is that people don't have as strong of a preset notion of what they want out of the final image. And so it allows for a lot more jazz and a lot more freestyle and it's a lot more open to being like, oh, you're going to paint? All right, well, if you're terrible, I'll take the photo this way. Like, I'll angle it. It's not going to hurt me. Like, I don't control the outside world. I'm used to not controlling the edges of my painting. I'm also not precious about it because it might get tagged with, like, anything the next day. You hope it doesn't. But, like, there's a mortality to your art. There's a mindset like that. And so I think it was good at like deflating the sense of control and deflating the sense of like needing to be hyper contrived and curated. And so painting with them, especially the ones who were so good, who were so generous. I remember being in school and I would never want to collab with a freshman on a canvas. That would be so bad. I need to collab only with people who are better than me. And or not at all, but there's a generousness to street art, and I found that a lot there. And I think there were a lot of things going for me. I think it was novel to paint with like an American, for sure. But it was fun. I think I mentioned this before the last time we talked, but it's so big to be right next to someone while they're actively painting. You don't have to ask them questions. It's sort of like you can see the algorithm of how you make a skinny line. You know that they put the line first and then they erase the sides. And it's so helpful. And I think like all the like technical painting skills I've learned, it's been from street art and graffiti, because that's the only time I'm like actually getting craft workshops. At school I didn't get craft workshops. I got a lot of other cool things, but my painting skills came from watching people much better than me like at the wall live. While like I struggled here, they did it effortlessly there. So
now in that bit, you were talking about collaboration, and I know I've seen a lot of the collaborative pieces that you've done on social media, but then also the big wall here at Crosstown. I'm curious how, and you were also saying that it wasn't really necessarily on your radar early on. How did it become on your radar, and how did it work its way into your practice?
Collaboration?
Mm-hmm.
It's an essential part of graffiti. It's an essential part of street art. I don't think you can exist as a graffiti artist or street artist without collaboration. Like it's tied into the lexicon. Like a production has multiple artists on it. Um, you're you're working for free, so if you have a 30-foot by 10-foot wall, you're hoping other people will help foot some of the bill. So you don't want to paint out there for a month for just yourself. Maybe if you're independently wealthy, but it's it's easier to be brave about a spot. You're painting in public where you don't know people. You want to have a community with you to where you feel secure while you work, and especially then it was this romantic moment where like it did not seem possible to make money doing this. So what was the point of it if you did it alone? The whole reward was the socialness, was like hanging out with people and was feeling included in this club. If you did it alone, like you don't get the club, and the whole reason I did it was to be in the club. So
and also for me, like thinking about collaborating, I mean, I've collaborated with a lot of people in a lot of different ways over the years. And like you were saying, it was kind of the social thing. Like for me, the first time I collaborated with somebody where I was kind of serious about it or really open about it was with a teacher of mine in Iowa, this guy David Dunlap, and he was kind of...
I love his work.
He's just kind of this guy, who you just kind of want to hang out with. And he said, "Do you want to come over and do this thing?" And I did, and then later it sort of grew into a more important part of my practice. But so much of it is based on trust. And so, I mean, I'm curious about that too, in terms of thinking about the people that you work with. How does it, obviously it can be a kind of organic thing. Here we are, there's 5 of us, we're on this wall. But I'm curious too, like how does it work for you in terms of, because now you're more selective about it. Now you've got these people that you like to work with and people that you admire. And so I'm curious about how it works for you now in your practice.
I follow David Dunlap forever on Facebook. It just seems like they have a fun social art life. I love all the designy work. I love all the text and stuff.
And then also just like Venn diagram overlap thing. Do I remember right? Did when he came to MCA and did a presentation, did Susan Mockestad give you his suit to wear around, or is that a different story in my head?
I feel like that's a different story.
Okay,
I would have loved to wear
someone
David
else.
Dunlap.
Okay. I wonder who that was. I'm gonna have to ask Susan and see who that was. But in my brain, it was like suddenly my brain said, "Oh, that was Michael."
That would have been wonderful.
Okay, no.
Collaborations now, I think I like collaborations because they take me back to this sort of romantic time. So I work a lot more alone than I used to, and it's a lot more jobs, and I'm thankful for that. But I feel like you need to keep painting with others, or you lose the reason you came into it. So I curate the Moon Pie project here in Memphis, and whenever those artists come in, I make sure to paint one extra mural with them in town, and that sort of helps me get to live that again. And then when I'm out of town, I paint a lot of collabs because I feel like it's an important way to give back. People are being generous with their city, and they're letting you paint in it. And I think it's important to connect yourself to the community. So if I'm in Denver, I paint with Denver locals. And if I'm in Chicago, I paint with Chicago locals. And so, I mean, some of that is like just community strengthening. You don't want to feel like an outsider who came in, you took their money, you did not communicate with them, you did not paint with them. And then, I always try to paint with like actual graffiti writers too, and like keep it related to like the reason this economy exists is like traditional graffiti. So I feel like it's important sort of like background work and just keeping the relationships tight and keeping community tight and not doing sort of like erasure of the culture. I think it's like an important part for that. But as far as like painting when I'm trying to curate a collaboration, I still just want to like be included in some group that maybe I don't feel included in yet. So like it's fun to paint with people who like are infinitely better than me, and then I can try to like be as good as I can to not embarrass them. I think it's always like I work harder when I'm focused on not embarrassing someone I look up to rather than not embarrassing myself. So it's good to paint with people who are crazy good.
I like that. I've never heard that before. What? Will you back up a little bit and talk about Moon Pie? How it came to be, all of its parts?
Yeah, for a while I was living in Memphis after traveling, and I was living in a van, and I would travel to these other cities, and people were really generous to me. They'd like give me a couch to stay on. They'd find me a wall, and I was sort of like throwing apple seeds, and then eventually jobs would come. I'd get to come back to St. Louis. I'd get to come back to Chicago or Kansas City or something. But I was just sort of doing free walls and like alleys and stuff, but doing my style and just trying to get it out there and trying to get more people to see it and trying to get a following. And people were really kind and like allowed me these situations because I didn't know the city, and they'd help me out so much. And I wanted to bring people back to Memphis, but I couldn't invite them to stay in my van. And I didn't have any money to pay them, and I didn't want to tell them, hey, travel all the way to Memphis, get a hotel, paint with your own money, and then leave. That seemed rude. And so I was talking to Chris Miner when Crosstown was still like a thought. It was just that gallery across the street, and this building was closed down and all. And I said it to him just randomly, but he sort of like turned it into like a structured thing where he's like, well, we can do this, and it'll be this many times a year. And I think it started 4 times a year, and the budget was really low, and I brought my closest friends who I didn't mind underpaying, and they'd come and paint a wall, and then we'd paint it over because it was like a literal wall, an actual wall. And then it sort of morphed over the years, and the budget got a little bit bigger, and it was tied with concourse now, so they could take the walls, and so we made them like sort of faux walls that you could hang inside. And Crosstown Arts grew a little bit, so they were able to like give them a dormitory for their stay. And it's been super fun curating it, and it's helped me build like a pretty cool, long-lasting relationship with Crosstown Arts, which is probably like my biggest like relationship in Memphis. And so it's been great, and I get to bring artists around, and I feel like it shows how wildly diverse this scene can be, and how many aesthetics can happen, and how much you can do with the material. And maybe like 6 years ago, I saw this like graffiti that was like kind of a sad version of my work, and I was like, they need more options. If they're like copying me, then they need to know there's better people to copy. And I think the Moon Pie's been good for that. Just like Memphis doesn't have the biggest street art scene. It doesn't have the biggest graffiti scene. And so if we can bring in like world-class street art and it be available here in Memphis, and Crosstown like presents it, then that's really exciting to me. And then when people from that scene come to Memphis, I can take them to Crosstown, and they go like, okay, y'all know Rich T, y'all know Mr. B Baby, y'all know Sydney. And so I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, to me, I mean, it feels like such a wonderful project, and then it's also one of those things that, as a Memphian, when I bring people here, it's a delight for me to be able to say, okay, so here's this crazy idea. So, and then I tell the story kind of in the way that I remember the Moon Pie project. And then, of course, as we walk around, there's another one. And I love that thing that you said about the diversity. There's such a huge variety of hands and voices that are at play in those pieces. Where did the name Moon Pie come from?
It came from, there was a Nashville muralist, kind of like an old school muralist, and like not part of the graffiti scene, but just like a good wall painter named Brad Wells. And he would paint things like elementary schools or public libraries. So if you needed a room that looked like a magical forest, he'd knock it out. And he was super nice dude. He came out to a mural festival here, or a graffiti festival, honestly, here in Memphis years ago. And he painted like pretty near me, but I liked him a lot because he wasn't from what all of us were from. He wasn't threatened by that. He was super like engaged with it and super excited about it. And he just liked being out. And he was a big like marijuana smoker. So he'd buy all these pipes while he was in town, and then he didn't travel with all these things, so he'd give them out. And I don't smoke at all, but I thought it was a very sweet, kind of cool social gesture to like buy these things and hand them out. And in graffiti, you fly, you can't take your spray paint, so you always buy a lot of things and you hand them out. And so he was just a nice guy. He came back a few times. And then, unfortunately, he passed away really unexpectedly. He wasn't that old. I think it was like natural causes, but I want to say he was in like his late 40s, maybe early 50s. And when he was young, he was the model for moon pie. So if you ever had like a tin lunchbox and there's like a little boy eating a moon pie on a step, that was Brad. And so I thought it would be a fun nod to him, and sort of his energy that he liked to travel and just paint like for a community. And that was sort of like the concept of moon pie art, is like I wanted people who like just wanted to paint for community and wanted them to come out for the community and the social aspect. And everyone who comes out to Moon Pie Project is getting pennies on the dollar of what they usually charge. And so it's just a friendship thing, and it's a way of paying people back where, like, you know, in my career, I have a note that says, like, you know, you painted in Albany, New York. Seems cool. No one knows how much I got paid. It might have been nothing. So they have Memphis, Tennessee on their CV now.
And then there's probably something a little different about the fact that they're painting these walls, and then the walls are then put into this kind of institution, and then they sort of stay that way, and there isn't the risk or the danger in the same way, I guess, that there would be like if it were out in the world. And so it's slightly more permanent, and I would imagine that would also be kind of daunting.
Yeah, no one's ever told me it was daunting for them, but then I always get haggard, you know, 10-year professionals or something, so I'm sure they've done something similar. But I will say, like, even if it lasts outside, I think Memphis has a pretty good track record of being pretty generous to murals. There's not a huge scene here. It's not a lot of animosity in general when it comes to mural art stuff. So they last, but the elements eat them eventually. So it's cool that they can go inside and the UV isn't an issue anymore. Right. Also, you know, Crosstown Arts is very good about making these little wooden plaques that have QR codes. So I like to hope that one day some of these artists come back because, you know, a job opportunity finds them at Crosstown. That's sort of like my big wish. But yeah, we've had a couple of the artists come back. Detour's come back for a number of lectures outside of Crosstown.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned a couple of times was how Memphis was lacking in a particular culture. And one of the things I love about Memphis is that there's a kind of, for me, I see it as a kind of possibility to make a great impact without necessarily killing yourself. You know, so like, for example, like this Moon Pie project is such a wonderful thing and so far reaching in so many ways, when really it was sort of born from this conversation with Chris, you know, and then really all we need to do is to do X, Y, and Z in order to make this amazing thing happen. And so I'm curious, like, if you were suddenly crowned king of the city, what do you think? Like, and I know that it isn't one of those things where Birdcap says, well, we need to do X, and then suddenly, we have a great street art culture. But I'm curious, what are some things that you see as places for us to grow and to make things better for those of us who are thinking to ourselves, like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we make it better? What do we do?
Oh, Lord. I don't know.
I mean, and it's also one of those really hard questions. It's like, how do you make Americans love art as much as Italians? Well, okay, you go back 1,000 years, and then you do this and you do that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, and like I said, I don't think it's necessarily one thing, but like if you could say initiate some projects or to think about some particular things, what might those things be?
I don't know. I would like to go back and say like Moon Pie Project is great, and it's great 98% because Crosstown Arts allows it to happen and funds it and has made it possible, and the impact is so much because of how available and accessible Crosstown Concourse is and their relationship with Crosstown Arts, and I feel very excited to get any like reflected glory, but it's so much, it exists because of so many people, and it has stayed around because of so many people, because Crosstown has gone through many phases during that time, and it could have been cut at any moment, and people like Stacy keep it alive. So just want to say that because they're super wonderful. I'm so grateful for them. Memphis, it's hard to talk about like why Memphis doesn't have a cooler street art scene without talking about much bigger issues in Memphis. And as far as arts, like I feel like the art I make has a purpose and it has meaning and merit, but is my work the most important work to people living under the poverty line? Does it speak to them? No, I don't think so. Maybe to some extent, but I don't think it's the loudest voice for them. I don't think it like reflects exactly what people under the poverty line are going through. Mine is much more like, oh, did you lose a girlfriend or a mom? Are you excited about nostalgia? Like it has a place, but it's not the solution for a lot of things. And I think Memphis's biggest issues are economic, and if people don't feel like they can feed themselves, and if people don't feel safe, or if the education program isn't helping them, then who cares about street art? Like it's a frivolous thing.
Well, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I am the first one to say that, you know, during the Rwandan genocide, at no point did anybody say, hey, let's find that guy.
We need to fund street art.
Yeah, that guy Hamlet. Where are those abstract paintings with the patterns? We need those. But I think, like, one of the things that I've been thinking about a bunch is how, especially with street art, how it sort of grew out of the thing that you're talking about. It grew out of kind of poverty, and it grew out of, especially in New York, in my sort of pedestrian understanding of it, is that the idea is that it was a way of claiming space. It was a way of saying, I don't really own anything. I don't have anything. And then by being able to do this art outside, suddenly the availability of spray paint cans and the availability of X, Y, and Z made this possible, in the same way that like the post-impressionists suddenly had paint in tubes, you know, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that it was a way for people who wouldn't normally have a voice to have a voice, in terms of street art. But then also there's this thing, especially in New York, about how thousands of people, millions of people will see a train, you know, in a day, or, you know, millions of people will see a wall as they go past it on the train in a day. And so there's this like availability of this space that's sort of questionably public. You know, it's like, it's a train. I kind of own the train. I paid my taxes and it's my train, and so I'm going to spray paint on it, you know, that kind of thing. And so I think like some of that comes from that. And so this idea of how do we get people to have a voice, or the possibility of people to have a voice, not necessarily through street art, but through art in general. And so part of this is all kind of a circuitous way of saying, I'm with you. Yes, we really don't matter that much in the world, but I think the possibility is there. And for me, that's kind of important, you know?
Yeah, I'm not saying we don't have a place in the world. I'm just saying I'm saying we have a quiet place, and I think I just have like a knee jerk reaction whenever we talk about art in replacement of like political upheaval or reconstruction or like I don't want to get too big for our britches. We have a place. I'm not saying we're worthless. I obviously like it enough that I've committed my whole life to it. But but I think political graffiti and graffiti of the proletariat and revolutionary graffiti and graffiti that's asking for like civil change is obviously different than a lot of what I do. I hope that my work talks about that where it has space to and where I feel comfortable being the voice for it. But but I don't want to delude myself into thinking that I'm anywhere as important as that on this topic. Like, I think a very easy critique of me is that I'm closer to Nike than Malcolm X. Like I'm a brand. I hope it's an honest brand, and I hope I speak to my life, but my life is one of many privileges. In whatever hardships I have, I get to talk about them romantically on like a podcast about how I chose to live in a van and like I was like voluntarily homeless because I could have like lived with my daddy. I am yeah, I'm not
I'm with you.
I'm not if we put my career and everything about me into the context of what's wrong with Memphis, it's easier to argue I'm what's wrong with Memphis than like how I can fix Memphis.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm with you in a lot of ways, and I think for me, one of the things that's really interesting about being in Memphis and being kind of like an old guy is like I remember when, Lord, I hope I get the guy's name right. I feel like his name was Jeff Zimmerman, the guy that came and did
I know him. He's
the
a
mural.
buddy. Yeah.
Okay, so he came to town.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was this thing where Coda at Memphis, I think maybe one of the guys who was like a board of directors at Rhodes or something owned the building. That might be historically inaccurate, but I remember there being some sort of a connection there. And then I remember Coda wanted to do this project where they brought in an artist and did a big mural for the neighborhood. And that was really, and I know that there were murals before that, but that was really the first massive scale mural that I can think of in town. Mm-hmm. And then I remember when he came, and this also might be historically inaccurate, but I remember when he came to town, he needed help.
Yep.
And so some of the people that helped him then got the bug, the infection of murals and wanting to make things as well. And so I know just from this one guy coming to town, 4 or 5 other muralists were born, not just in terms of like, hey, this is exciting, but also this is possible, and these are the tools that I need in order to do this, and this is whatever that stuff is, Tyvek or
Polytab.
Mm-hmm. Here are these things that I need to know. These logistical, technical things like you were talking about before.
Yeah, we got hyper fixated in Memphis about Polytab for a while.
Yeah,
we were the number one economic boom for Polytab for like 6 years. To this day, I get the guy in New York who like runs it out of his basement or whatever, emailing me being like, "Do you need more Polytab?" It's like, no, you sell it in huge amounts.
But I know how impactful that was, having him come to town and for this project, and then also for people in town to say, holy cow, that is a huge mural, and it's awesome, and it's really interesting and strange, and it's not boring. It's not, whatever.
No.
Insert boring art here.
Jeff is fantastic. He lives in Chicago. I've been to his studio a number of times, and he's extremely gracious and humble and incredibly talented painter. But I remember when he came through, and I met him at Martial Arts Gallery. They were having some group show, and he had done his little paper airplane project there. And I've painted with him since, and he was influential, and in that way, I think I'd like to hope me and Nosy are in some small way responsible for there being a lot of murals that are not done by me and Nosy in Memphis now. It's easy to forget how old you are, of course, but like I see people in their 20s who, like, in high school they found out about my work, and whether they care for my work or not, usually they're kind to me at least, but um, I like to think that, like, once you see something's possible, it's a lot easier to go beyond it. You know, it's like skateboarding seemed impossible. Tony Hawk did a 900. That seemed cool. Now 7-year-olds do 1440s. Like, so, you know, no one wants to feel like the founding members to hip hop because they don't get paid as much. But I like to think if there was something generative I've brought to Memphis, it's what you said. It's the possibility that this is an option as a career, and that people are more willing to try it and more willing to, like, stick it out and become a professional artist because there's somebody nearby who's worse than they are who made it. Like, I made it with my dumb cartoons. You can make it with your better artwork.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean, like, also, for example, so, like, I remember in the early days of the Urban Art Commission here in town, they took a lot of heat for mostly bringing people in from out of town, you know, rightfully so, of course, you know, and then that, I think, motivated them to have a more outward-facing approach. And so it wasn't just including Memphis artists in this call, but also providing educational opportunities for Memphis artists to learn about polytab and to learn about all of the scaffolding and all of the things that you need to know, and then going through all of the rigmarole of applying for a public art thing. And so, like, those things, I think, are maybe some of the things I'm thinking about in terms of what are some small steps, maybe not massive steps like waving a magic wand and making poverty disappear. But I will go back just a little bit, and I know, Birdcap, for me, when I'm doing these interviews and someone will say something nice about me, it makes me very uncomfortable, and I'll say, oh, okay, right. But when you were talking about having those big pieces and having people see those things and be motivated by them, I really think that goes back to that thing that we were talking about a second ago with New York and how people see stuff, and if they see something that gets their juices flowing and makes them want to do something, I think it also feeds back into that, you know. And I think I'm glad that you're at a place where you can say that that's a good thing, because I feel like it's really particularly impactful. I mean, not just because your work is so well executed and because it speaks to me on a million different levels, but I think there is something about other people seeing people do things that make it feel possible, you know. And to me, that feels really good. And I think that's a big part of the step in terms of, or one of those little teeny tiny little steps that we can make in terms of making Memphis more, oh my God, that cannot be right. Okay, no, that's not right. It's just noon. I was like, oh my God, there's no way it's time to stop. Okay, but I think, to me, that's really important, you know, and I think the things that you're doing, of course, you're not necessarily doing them in the mindset that you're going to motivate some little whippersnapper to come and make work better than you. Really, you're just making a kick-ass mural, you know? But I think all of that stuff sort of feeds into it. Does that make sense?
No, I think so. I mean, I agree. I think if there's, like, one positive argument I can make for my work that isn't, like, wholly selfish or about, like, some personal relationship with someone who, like, understands the content, it's the general atmosphere that, like, these things are possible. And you can make something that's not about barbecue 7 stories in Memphis. Like, I've always been really hardlined about not wanting to do quotations of the city in the city, because I think the city knows who the city is, and I don't want to make stuff for people who are visiting. I want to make stuff for the people who live here, and I feel like you have to allow a city to be defined by the people in it, and I'm a person in it, and I think that's the cool thing about LA, that's the cool thing about New York. It's a problem with Memphis and New Orleans, right, is we're so beholden to an economy of tourism and to an identifying by historical creations, that sometimes we underfund who we actually are to endorse who we want to be seen as. But like, most of the people in my life don't eat barbecue that regularly. None of us really go to Graceland, and I don't drink on Bill Street often. Like, this is all fine and should exist, but I have no interest in talking to Memphis about stuff that Memphis already knows and Memphis doesn't even go with. I'd rather paint the P&H Cafe than Bill Street. I'd rather like be part of Crosstown than Graceland. So I think if there is any conscious theme I have for the city and what I think is important in the arts, it's that we are selfish with how we make it, because being selfish is being part of the city. Being selfish is being what the city actually is. Like, I am a Memphian, so this relates to the city automatically. I don't need to put identifiers on it.
I mean, I think that is also a really great place to think about, because I think in the things that you're doing, it's a much more outward facing, it's a much more public kind of interaction, and also a kind of, like you said, maybe you didn't use the word representation, but to think about how you picture the city, or you make an image that fits inside the city. And I mean, to me, that is such a rich territory for muralists and people who work outside, in the same way that earlier you were talking about collaboration and how it's kind of something that you have to do. But also, real early on, you as a maker had to think about the things that were on the wall before you got to it. You as a maker had to think about how your piece fits in there, or how you remove information in order to put your piece in there. And so there's a kind of consideration that I think somebody who picks up a piece of Stonehenge, like you said before, doesn't necessarily think about it. And I think in the same way that you have to think about architecture, and the way that you have to think about structure and visibility, and like, when you come off the stairs you see this, or when you turn the corner you see this, you have to consider stuff that I think a lot of people in their solitary teeny tiny little studio practice, they don't necessarily have to think about. And to me, it's like a totally different muscle set. It's a totally different way of working. I'm curious, when you go to another city though, when you go to another city and you're doing these things, obviously when you make work in Memphis, there's a mindset, but when you go into another city to work, how does the mindset change for you?
It doesn't change a lot. I mean, if there's a job, I go towards the job, and if it's organized by a neighborhood or a specific community, then I go towards that. But if I'm given free reign, I go free reign. I don't like to consider it. I try to make work from a generous place. I'm not trying to make it from a place that's wholly unrelatable. I try to make it something that is universal to being human. But I don't think much more than that. I think it's an easy critique of me, but I do like the idea of being myself in my work, and I feel awkwardly comfortable wherever I'm at, and that's maybe a horrible thing, but it's honest. Like, if that's a critique about me, then that's fair. That's what I am. I've always felt like if you're going to do something as absurd as think your art deserves to be in a public space, if you're already that dumb, then go full dumb. Like, I don't like the pretense of like I can defend why I'm being selfish with this public space if I put this or that, or I argue that it's about this or that. It's like, no, I'm taking up space that I don't own. This is absurd. This is barreling. This is crazy. So just own it. Like, don't hide behind, I don't know, a thin argument. If you're not from that area and someone says you have no right making work there, they're right, probably. Like, I'm going to put it up. I think it was, I always go back to this, but Dave Hickey had this quote that was like, graffiti is a cruel democracy. And he talked about the idea of the blind contract. Like, you put artwork up in a public space. If it stays, then the city and the community has agreed it's worth staying. If they don't like it, let them destroy it. And they have voted it is not worth staying. And I've always liked that. Like, I don't like boardrooms. I don't like watered down, stupid art where like 19 people agreed that like the most unoffensive thing to put on that wall is a piece of bread. And then you make a piece of bread you're not happy with, and they have a mural of a piece of bread they don't really like. Just paint whatever you want. If the city finds it so distasteful, a 14-year-old will tag over it, or a suburban mom will make sure the city paints over it, or like someone will take care of it if it's not good. And if the city likes it, well, it becomes a part of the city, and like you have a blind contract, and you shake hands, and you're cool. But yeah, I'm extremely. I make the work that's on my mind when I make it, and I try to make it as good as possible. So I don't. I don't want to do a disservice to the space, but I think my thoughts of trying to make it good for the community come in like trying to make sure the wall lasts and like do the work to take care of the wall and make an image that I think is like honest and engaging. But if you don't like it, that's fair, and if you live next to it, you should paint over it. And if you don't like it and you don't want to paint over it yourself, if you message me, I'll cover my work. Like, I'm not pressed about it.
Now, I'm curious, like in terms of thinking about that thing that you were talking about, the cruel democracy. I love that thing, but then I also love how some things live in our visual space and they aren't necessarily art, but they're things that were particularly interesting or particularly motivating. You know, like for me, when I lived on Broad, there was a sign that used to be a Peter Pan pantry, and it got painted over, and then someone else painted over it, and then someone graffitied it, and then someone else painted over it, and someone else painted over it. And so there's this kind of like history of the thing. I'm curious, like when you were growing up, were there things in the public sphere that moved you, images, you know, that you would pass every day, or signs, or other things that were a kind of thing where you thought it was possible to be a part of the visual culture?
Someone called those like when you paint over graffiti in these blotches. I remember someone calling them unconscious Rothkos. I visually, there wasn't a lot outside for me. I don't remember anything. I mean, I could say these like stereotypical things of like hand painted signs. I'm sure they had like some meaning to me, but it's not like I was Margaret Kilgallen or something like soaking in the off-putting text kerning or something. I don't know. I think no. The graffiti was interesting. We had trains, and I remember thinking that was cool and otherworldly, and I'm sure that like landed somewhere in me. But I'd say my biggest childhood influence visually were cartoons and comic books and all the typical stuff you'd expect from a boy in the 90s.
Now, okay, so just while I've still got you here, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your grief manual, and thinking about how for me it functions differently than like your murals do, because it's such a ordered narrative and it's such a linear thing. I'm curious.
You're the only one who's ever called it linear.
Well, I mean,
I appreciate
it bounces, but it's definitely like a this page leads to this page, and so, and to me, Michael, it's a really beautiful story, and sad and self-effacing, and but also powerful. And I'm curious, when you started that project, how did it feel? Did it feel different than the things that you normally do?
Um, I think murals are my social life. I think it's like who I am to enjoy myself and feel like I had a full life, and it edifies me, and it's all these things. I feel like comic books and narrative work in general is the closest I feel to being an artist. I don't know. I even my murals I feel like are fragments of a narrative. Like it's one scene of a comic that I wasn't clever enough to figure out the caption to. So much of my art feels like a compromise to like there's this book I would like to write, but I don't know how to write, and I'm not really good at figuring out stories. So here's a fever dream of part of the book I wish I could write. That's how I think of like most of my visual pieces. Comic books, I really feel gratified making them. I feel like I'm saying something, whether it's like important or not, or well said or not. I it hits a different level for me. I think I in a dream world I could get paid to do that year round. And I'd paint murals as my like weekends and my breaks because I enjoy painting more than anything else. I enjoy painting on wall. That's my favorite activity. But I do feel like the most like productive as an artist when I'm trying to make narrative in comics, and like I feel like it's something I wish I could do more.
Well, I mean, I remember when I got it. I remember I had gotten some of the comics, maybe like at 501 or maybe at some other places or some zine swaps or something. Somehow they came into my world. And then when you made the book that was a kind of a culmination of these projects, to me there was a kind of urgency to it. Like it was something that you it wasn't like a thing where someone said, "Oh man, you gotta if you do this for Patreon, you'll have more people or whatever." It wasn't one of those things. It was like, here's this thing that Michael is doing, and there's a kind of urgency. It's like a thing that you sort of had to make. There was a kind of catharsis in it for me as a reader, and then also in terms of like I could see literally and read literally the conflict and the wrestling that you were doing inside your head as a maker. And to me, it felt really vulnerable and also really, really urgent, like I said. Did it feel that way for you?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely was. I started the Patreon because I wanted to be held responsible to a timeline. And so that that made it a semi-monthly project, and it meant I had to process my mother's death. So I would make a list of ideas based on writing scripts and writing sort of journal entries about my mom's death and how I was feeling that month. And she died like a month before the world shut down for COVID. Mm-hmm. So it was this thing I had to keep me on the rails. And usually I think when someone dies, you can like socialize and talk to other people. And I don't think anyone feels comfortable putting that sort of weight on their friends consistently, but even more so when they're like in a world pandemic and they have their own stresses and their jobs are being cut off. And it did not feel like I had a place to vent or mourn my mom. And this gave me an audience that was extremely generous and sweet and would share their grief with me, and I would get these cool emails back. And like I've painted murals for a long time, but usually you get like 4 fire emojis, which is totally cool. I send the same comment back to 98% of my friends, but like the grief manual, I would get these like really sweet emails. And so it was cool to process. And then early doors, I like realized like it was going to have to be like fairly non-linear because I found that my grief was very nonlinear, where like I felt good Tuesday and then I'm crying while I'm making soup for no reason an hour later, because I smelled a magnolia candle or something. Like, it was just so wild going through that process. And it was even wilder knowing this is like the most extreme feelings I've ever had, and they're the most mundane, common things. Like, it was so humbling to be like, the most important thing in my life, it's something everyone goes through. And it's not special. The most special feeling in the world I have is like a universal. And I loved it. I think I loved writing it, and I loved sharing it. And my girlfriend has told me a few times before, but she thinks it is one of my strengths, that I seem to have no trepidation sharing intimate details with like people like at a bus stop next to me. Like, I'll just be like, here's my traumas, like, and so I find that extremely cringeworthy about myself, but useful in this very like tiny way of like, if I'm going to write a story about grief, it won't be guarded, at least because I'm so like unaware of how much I'm putting on the person listening to me. Also, with the grief manual, it's not like being stuck with me at a bar. It's you don't have to pick it up at all. You know, you can walk away from it at any time.
Well, I mean, one thing I'm thinking about too with a grief manual is, I mean, in a way that like you and I will have a conversation. Obviously, sometimes we'll say something and it's a little bit too far, you know, or whatever, and you're like, oh, my bad. But like when you're making a book, you know, you have control. You can press, you know, undo, or you can erase it, or you can get rid of a page. And I'm curious, how did you shuffle, or how did you manage or balance the sense of what you felt okay with sharing?
As long as it seemed to make sense, my thought process was usually like thinking of like what metaphors, or like what did this feel like. I think in a lot of like metaphors in my head. And so like when I caught one that seemed impactful, I was like, can I turn this into a script? Does this make sense visually? And if it was a script that I felt worked better with visuals, then I was like, okay, I'll do this. Like, I wanted it to be like text and image. And I think I got a better sense of it the further the comic progressed. I ended up, I wrote it all just linear, and then when it came time, I had another comic book artist reorganize the book for flow, and so just someone with new eyes. But I do think the later half of the book was probably a lot more polished, because I was getting a sense of how to integrate text and image a little bit more. The first comics were a lot more like straightforward.
Well, I mean, that thing that you said, I mean, one of the things I love about having it is that it's a physical thing. It's a portable thing. I can have it in my office. I have it in my office. But I love how you were talking about working with metaphor, and then also like in the same way that we were talking last time about like, okay, you know, when you're a first year student, you have to make this piece, you know, and it's totally cringeworthy, but it's also a piece that you kind of have to make, you know. And I think in metaphor, a lot of times when you're making something, a lot of times that first one you reach for is an honest and legitimate one. But for me, the great thing about that book was that it had so many different layers of metaphor, so many different levels of taking one idea and bringing it into another one. I love that about the book. And then also one of the things I really love about the book too is what you were just talking about, with text doing its thing and then visuals doing its thing. To me, it seems like it was a really great, the book was like you were talking about the murals, being able to take it one step further and to allow it to be more sequential. But then also to let the text come in, because text isn't really something that is a large part of your mural work unless it's a kind of identifier or a name. And so In terms of thinking about that, with your practice when you were making the book, how did you sort those things out, or was it a thing that where it just sort of felt intuitive?
Um, it was all extremely intuitive. I wish I was someone who could have a strategy or a tactic going into anything. I feel like all of my art projects have always been blind groping and then sort of like recorrecting the mud I've cobbled together. So yeah, it's a Frankenstein of me. I mean, I started that comic 2 weeks after my mom died, so there wasn't a lot of forethought. It was just like I'm going to make. The first thing I ever made was the turning tips to turn tragedy into radigy or something like that. And I all I did was like list. I looked back on the week and I was like, here's 10 insane things I've done this week. Like I remember when mom died, I was back on the Gulf Coast. I literally, with all my clothes on in the middle of winter, I went swimming in the bayou, just across. I don't know why I thought cold water would be nice. And I'm getting out, and then all the family from up north is like driving down, and I'm just like drenched in the middle of the road. I was like, oh, I look insane. And so like, I knew they wouldn't bring it up, and we'd move on. But so when I made that, I was like, swim across the bayou in the winter. Like it was just confessional. I was like, these are dumb things I'm doing right now. I'm not well. And then it built from that and reflections from that. Um,
And I mean, also, not a question, but just a statement. I mean, to me, that book is such a great balance of all of the stuff that you've been talking about in terms of like sort of the recognizing the place that art has in the world, and then also recognizing its futility, and then but also sort of wrestling with your place in it. To me, it is a really beautiful and honest and open, but also sort of like vulnerable, like I said, a real vulnerable expression of what and I mean, to me, it's really great. Um, anyway.
I appreciate that. I think an advantage of the style I work in, which I've always felt, but I think came home a little bit harder with the Grief Manual, was I think when you have a style that is as lighthearted and seem like whimsical and cartoony as mine, I think it allows you to talk about really heavy things with it having like it allows it to retain a self-consciousness where it doesn't feel as dramatic as it could be if it was given like a more serious image. So I liked that, like, I've made stories on Instagram where like I talk about like suicide, but it's two dumb cartoons talking about it, and I think that allows space for people to like not cringe quite as hard. There's something slightly diffusing about the style when you're talking for 100 pages about your dead mother. It's good that it looks like a clown, or you'd get very sick of it, I think. So I appreciate that juxtaposition sometimes.
Okay, now to jump back into the land of chronology. So after you finished in Vietnam and your father was ill, you came back to Memphis. Mm-hmm. What was going on then?
Very little. I came back to Memphis and I was staying between different friends' houses and watching a lot of cats to be able to like stay on couches, and I met up with Nosy and painted some graffiti in Orange Mound, and
now how did you know Nosy?
I didn't know him.
Oh, you just sort of met him
we were Facebook friends, and he became aware that I was painting walls, and so when I moved back to Memphis, he messaged me blind on Facebook, which is very like the whole storyline of my career. It's just like a wall painter messages me or I message them, and we don't know each other. He showed up in a truck, picked me up from wherever I was staying, and I remember he had like a real dusty seat because his dog was in the car, and he started to like pat it off, and I jumped on it, and he said later, he's like, that's when I knew we'd be friends, as you didn't mind being filthy immediately. But we painted two characters very apart from each other. It was sort of like an exploratory painting session. And then we painted together quite a lot for the next couple years. He's obviously much more like established in Memphis at that point, and he put me on a lot of random projects, and we ended up painting the Brooks Museum together, doing the Art of Video Games mural exhibit. I think we were hired by Stanton Thomas, who now works in St. Pete. But yeah, he was my start to like a Memphis relationship with the scene. And then I went to St. Louis and painted. I had met a teacher when I was traveling, and a lot of his students he thought I'd get along with, and they were in St. Louis, so I went up there and ended up painting with a lot of muralist types in St. Louis on Cherokee Street, and slowly just kept branching out from there and would meet different artists and backpacked around the States, took a lot of mega buses and Greyhound buses, and painted for a gallery in Chicago, and finally got a call for entries on cafe.org, and it was for like a $10,000 mural, which I thought was the biggest job in the whole world. It was in Denver, and I painted it, and then I snuck into a mural festival that was happening like the next week. I offered to paint for free, painted at this festival. I ended up going back to that festival for like 10 years straight as like a paid artist. But after that happened, and I moved to New York because I was dating someone who had moved to New York. After that, I got into a DC mural festival, and between the two festivals, I started getting work across the nation a little bit more often, and it slowly got better financially and like stability wise.
And I like that thing that you said about how Nosy just sort of messaged you out of the blue. I'm curious. I mean, and then the thing that you said about the dust on the seat. I love that. What are the things? Because I've collaborated with a lot of people, and some of them have really clicked. Some of them have not, but they've been really fruitful and really fun, and so no shade on them. But I'm curious, what was it about the collaboration with Nosy? Because that feels particularly fruitful and particularly good. What do you think it was that made that collaboration work as well as it does?
I don't know. I've thought about it before. I mean, we barely paint together anymore. He's busy, and and I'm doing my thing, but it just feels very intuitive with him. I wish there was like a way to. I feel like we talk in the same language. It's easy to work on each other's stuff. I feel like we both sort of have like the same polish and goal for like what the end result wants to be. I think he's pretty hard on himself. I think I'm pretty hard on myself. So like, I don't know. I think there's a real trust there. Like I know if we're painting one character together and I'm working on the hands or something, if Nosy's working on the shoe, I know the shoe's going to look good. Like I know I don't need to check in. We don't need to have a conversation about like, are we sure this is the shoe? Like I think there's ultimately just a lot of trust where like I know Nosy will execute things really well. I know if anything he'll do it in a way that's even better than I imagined. So it's like anytime I'm painting with him, I think there's a chance this is going to be better than if I painted by myself. And I think that's what you ultimately want from a collaboration, is like there's a spark of hope that you couldn't do this alone. Like you never want to collaborate and be like, this is as good as I could have done alone. Like why even bother? So yeah, it's always felt very intuitive, and yeah, I think there's an underlying logic to how we create images that seems synergetic, where like I know if I look at him, I know how many more highlights he's going to put on, or like when he's going to line it. There's just something silly and easy.
And then, okay, so then you were talking about being a little bit more stable and finding jobs and finding gigs, and how, like logistically, in the same way that I was talking about the logistics of before, like you going to Vietnam and meeting people. How did that work? So, in terms of thinking about your life now, I mean, obviously, you're also around a lot of other mural artists, and I'm sure in the same way that when you guys were hanging out having soup, you were learning a lot. I'm sure that there was a lot that you were learning from other muralists who make a living doing this. But I'm curious, like, what are the logistics of the life of a mural artist? Because it's something that's totally alien to me, and so I'm curious, like, what are the logistics of it? Like, how does it work?
It's a gig economy, so you have a notepad and you want to be full 3 months out, 4 months out if you can. If there's any large spaces, you think about things you can self-start. So, like, if I have 3 weeks in April, do I do a T-shirt release in April? Do I release a toy in April? Do I do a local project in Memphis? It's just trying to build a full schedule, and then balancing that and your mental health. I think the hardest thing is to feel like you have a strong regimen when your life is so like dynamic when it comes to like where you're working and where you are in the country, where you are in the world. So I think that takes some getting used to. I think there's an altitude of danger you have to get used to where like you might have done well in 2024. You might do terrible in 2025, and you have to like feel that descent and not eject from the plane. You have to like know that a job will probably come along. You have to be sure a job's going to come along when there's no evidence. Like it's you're refreshing your Gmail account like a lottery system, and then so much of it is it's like being a little dictator for a meaningless country. You have to project strength. Like if you're struggling, if you have a bad month, it does you no good to tell people you had a bad month. All it does is make your brand look cheap. It's like, oh, are you bad? I should buy your prints for much less. You sad person. Like the difference between someone wanting to buy your art and someone not wanting to buy your art is you asking if they want to buy your art. It's insane. Like there's so many weird psychologies to artwork and the worth of your brand, which is or if your art, which is weirdly like there's like a bloodletting dark ritual where that worth is tied to your self-worth. So if you don't make work, you have to convince yourself, or if you don't sell something this month, you have to convince yourself you're not worthless. But you don't believe that. You know you're worthless. Like you're worthless. The next job comes and you're like, oh, cool, I'm worth something for three weeks. Like like it goes down. You have to keep filling the work forever, and you hope for a big job one day that allows you to make comic books that are no money. But like,
well, I mean, I love what you're saying, and I'm totally with you. Like in terms of the up and downness, and I think so much of that just has to do with our place in the world, and then also just kind of the nature of being an artist, like you were talking about before with your dad. And now he said, you chose this, and so you can't complain. And so like there's a part of us that's like, oh, I'm not allowed to complain. But I'm curious, you mentioned a couple of times mental health, and obviously the Grief Journal was really sort of about that. And also one of the things that you've been talking about a bunch throughout our conversation, which has been really wonderful, is you've kind of talked about realizing the things that you need in order to feel right, in the world. And so I'm curious, what are some things that you do that sort of help you feel right in the world, not just in terms of the things that you make art for, but in terms of like self-care? Like, what does that look like for you?
oh, I don't know. I don't do it very well. I think I think it helps when I'm in a. I like to be in a relationship, so I prioritize that and the health of it, and I try to go on a walk every day. Start the day with a big walk because I can get zoomed into work so immediately. Like I wake up and I feel like I'm late to work no matter what, and I think some of that is like my dad in me. But like I so hate and don't resonate with the idea of like the inspirational genius. Like I hate the idea of artists hanging out and waiting for a cool idea. It like makes my skin crawl. So like I need to be in the studio at 9 and I need to be there at least until 5, or I don't have a real job. Like I don't I don't put that pressure on any other artist. This is a solely self-flagellating. I need it to feel like construction work, but so I'll wake up early and I'll take a walk, and in that way, especially in the winter, I at least saw the sky today, and I think that's important. I think I struggle with like eating too much, but when I'm on my good graces, I like to like try to eat healthy. I think that helps a lot. Daily walk, and I try to talk to a lot of people every day. I think I used to be really bad about if I didn't get a phone call, no one wanted to talk to me. And I think I've come to accept that like other people's lives have more people in their home, or they have like a more structured job. And so if I call 90% of the time, that's fine. I'm in a very specific situation not everyone else is in. So I try to call 2 or 3 friends every day. And I think that does me a world of good more than anything else. Just make sure to stay connected, because I think it's easy for me to like disconnect because I'm not physically that social. I don't go out a whole lot. I don't go drinking a whole lot. I don't go to gallery shows a whole lot. I'm very homebody if I'm not at work. And if I'm at work, I'm 6 inches from a wall in Cincinnati. So I didn't see any of Cincinnati except for this like parking lot in Cincinnati. So I think, yeah, making sure to reach out to friends, keep those relationships tight is very helpful.
What about in terms of, I mean, obviously that's all really great and really key in terms of thinking about your own mental health and how you navigate it. I'm curious, are there things that you do to keep your wellspring full in terms of the making, in terms of the image generating? Because you make a lot of stuff.
I make a lot of stuff.
In a great way. I'm not saying like, damn, Birdcap, you make too much shit.
It's refuse. I'm like wish.com of shitty images. I'm addicted to drawing. It's a core habit. I used to chain smoke cigarettes in college. I quit. I started filling up sketchbooks like every 6 months. So I think I give myself a lot of leeway that like sometimes you have something to say and that will come out in a drawing, and sometimes you have nothing to say but you still have to draw. So I have a mixture of like things that are meaningful and completely aesthetic and doodly and nonsensical, but I don't think I like filter out anything that's on my mind. So if I'm like hyper fixated this week on like ancient Rome, my work will have signifiers of that. Where if I'm into Greece in a more serious way, I'll make a show about the Iliad. But I don't go looking for things for my art. I don't like read to try to figure out inspiration. I read because I like to, and then whatever that topic is, it'll make its way into my work. I could be a lot better about looking at other artists and being more inventive, but I think I've gotten into a thing of like, it's just such an internal journey for me in art at this point. Like, I like using my work as catharsis, like you said. I like using it as like a diary entry, and so most of what inspires my art, I don't need to research. I almost need to like sit still and like, if I need something for my work, I'll journal. Like that's kind of my main thing. I like try to make myself write a couple pages every few days, and then something in that will usually be the germ of the next big project.
Now I'm curious too. So much of your life is in my brain nomadic. What are there art objects that you have with you that others have made that are kind of important or sort of touchstone things for you to have?
Oh, I have tons of little artworks. I have a Royal Rumble drawing by Tad. I have vinyl toys and these hand painted objects by Junk House. I have a J Flow sculpture. 99% of the artwork in my house are artists I know, and I felt like influenced me or made me better, or it's almost like I owe them acknowledgement in my domestic space. So that's why I have the art. It's like a gratitude object more than anything. So I have like a Guff Smells Good painting, and I don't have very much artwork by someone I don't know. I have a Trenton Doyle Hancock vinyl toy. I don't know him, but he was influential with his Art 21 early on. So
right. Well, I mean, for me, there's a bunch there. I mean, in terms of like thinking about your practice, like same. I have I have your sweatshirts, and I have the comic, and I have the prints that you made at 5-1. And so like there's a part of your practice that I really like that is manageable and that I can own, and I'm a typical person, middle class income, I can afford these things. And so to me that's something that's really great. In the same way that you're sort of talking about the Trenton Doyle Hancock toy, we can't buy a Trenton Doyle Hancock piece, but we can have a toy. Mm-hmm. To me, that's one of the things I really also like and admire about your practice is the approachability or the availability of having it in my world. And so I like that. But I'm curious, thinking about some of those pieces that you live with, like say, for example, the Tad piece. Like I also live with some Tad pieces. But I'm curious, because I think there's something sort of special and different about the way we as artists own and live with art. It functions kind of on a different level, And so I'm curious, in thinking about some of those pieces, maybe not necessarily Tad in particular, but what do you think some of those pieces do for you in your life?
For me, I think they make me feel gratitude, and they make me feel loved. Like the artist I have in my house, pretty much all of them made my life better. And so like for me it reflects their care for me, and that like I talk to my girlfriend about this sometimes when you have like you're having issues with self-worth, like a quick game to do is like think about all the people in your life who you think so highly of. Like, are they all fools for hanging out with you? Like, if you think so highly of these people, why are they all dealing with you if you're horrible? And so I think part of it's that. I think when I look into those walls and I think about like all the kindness that Junk House gave me or Tad gave me or Jason Spencer or all these people, it reminds me that I'm in good company, and I'm very grateful to know these people and to have gotten to witness their careers and their art and their personal practice, and so that's what the work does for me.
Yeah. Great. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Now wait, was there anything that you were like, oh man, today I'm totally going to talk about blank, blank, and blank?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely
so there's no
not.
questions that I was supposed to ask you, but that I forgot.
No, you messed up, man. There was some real gold you could have had, but I'm not going to let you know it. Yeah. Art is weird. It's fun to do.
But, I mean, to me, also, one of the things that I just love about doing these interviews is that, like, the whole time I was talking to you, I was like, oh, I have this student who is just going to, like, they need to hear that. Or I needed to hear that. Or that thing where, I asked you about what the art does. Like, never in a million years would I have thought that you would have said that it made you feel loved, or that it made you feel gratitude. That's, I just never thought about that, and I really appreciate you coming in and hanging out with me and answering these weird ass questions.
Yeah,
I appreciate it, Birdcap. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate it.
Y'all have a good day now.
And that was the second of 2 interviews that I recorded with Michael Roy, aka Birdcap. The interview that you listened to today was recorded on January 15th, 2025. Please join us next week when we'll have another interview. Until then, thank you so much for listening.